Review code provided by NISA. Killer7, a cult hit if I've ever seen one, conjured up by the unpredictable mind of Suda51 and heavily aided by Shinji Mikami, bringing this project to life through Capcom in 2005. This was the first original title by Grasshopper Manufacture to reach the United States. It, sold terribly, but was able to retain a legacy as a game that feels otherworldly with its unique cel-shaded art style, gameplay that's still completely foreign to anything else, and heavy emphasis on symbolism in its storytelling. Killer7 went on to become a prime example of games being so much more than the surface level of its medium, as I've discussed before. This will not be a full review on the experience itself, as I have already given my input on Killer7 and the impact it had on me and my life and how I perceive video games. If you haven't already seen it, check it out by clicking that button thing at the top right, I don't know what it's called. This is more of a look at how the people behind this port handled transferring an old Gamecube oddity to Steam, and if I recommend it for returning fans as well as newcomers. Players around the world have been begging to Capcom, please port Killer7 to newer platforms, but the company was likely not interested in the idea because it underperformed back in 2005. Considering how high of a budget they gave the project and its heavy marketing as part of the Capcom 5 campaign, I don't entirely blame them. It's as niche as a game can get. Around the 7th generation, Capcom really started cashing in on HD ports like many other companies and went gung-ho on the concept during the 8th. Just about all of their big hits would reach this generation, from Resident Evil to Devil May Cry and Dead Rising. The thing is, they seem to prioritize games that were already big sellers previously. You don't see God Hand getting remastered, do you? That's the same case for Killer7, which Capcom has kept the rights to. Suda has discussed in the past that he never followed up the original title because he didn't own it. It's no secret that these HD ports or remasters or what have you cost a decent chunk of cash to happen. But it's easy money as long as it's something people wanted, which they almost always are. Capcom generally likes to keep their remasters in-house so as to be more assured that a quality product comes out the other end. I'm not saying all their ports are perfect, but I think it's safe to say that none of them are even close to the disaster level we witnessed with the Silent Hill HD collection. Oddly, Killer7's Steam Edition became a special case in which this is an official port approved by Capcom, but they would not be responsible for its development or even publishing. The former would be handled by a Dutch company simply known as Engine Software, who seem to specialize in ports, and the latter by NISA, or Nippon Ichi Software America. I like to think I know this game up and down from beginning to end. If something is even slightly off in this port, I'm probably gonna notice. I own multiple copies of Killer7 and played the original title on Gamecube countless times. Did Engine Software deliver an experience as genuine as the Gamecube version for PC players? Watch me wave this imaginary badge of honor as we look at the long-awaited port of Killer7 with a fine-tooth comb. I was extremely concerned when the port was first revealed. They end the trailer with a shot that's clearly not even in 16:9 widescreen, a standard for ports of games originally set in 4:3, but not only that, there's a goddamn frame counter that's clearly from Dolphin, a well-known emulator for GameCube and Wii games. Just about everyone interested in the Steam port immediately turned their noses up, rightfully so. Why should we buy Killer7 Steam Edition if it's just a Dolphin emulator with this game loaded in? For those that may not be aware, that is indeed a common practice for porting classics onto new platforms. Hell, Sony themselves are using a typically known PlayStation 1 emulator for the upcoming PlayStation Classic. Not only that, but the next preview did not show any new features besides widescreen, everything was still stuck at 30 FPS, and the animation cutscenes they showed off looked fucking horrendous. Fast forward to the official launch of Killer7 on Steam. It's time to discuss what they did to enhance the experience of the game. Now, I'm kind of stingy about ports and remasters for classics I loved. At times, the people behind this port will add features in order to make the game more convenient. I don't find this practice offensive as long as it doesn't ruin the experience the original game had. There's a difference between making something convenient and making something easy. Killer7 on Steam actually added something very interesting to the controls, at least for keyboard and mouse. The standard of changing characters for the original version was the pause menu. While that's still a method you can use, they also mapped each individual character to keys 1 through 6. Now it's as easy as hitting a single key. And because of modern processors, loading time between them are almost non-existent. Swapping between Smiths has never been speedier. Healing can also now be done without using the pause menu. And you heard right, you can choose to use a regular controller or keyboard and mouse. Both schemes can be fully remapped as well. Now, I used to deal with playing shooting games on consoles, but ever since I started building my own computers and realized how good aiming felt with a mouse, I never looked back. Unless I played any that were exclusive to a console, such as this. With that said, aiming with a Gamecube controller was far from perfect, but it's how I've been playing this game for about 10 years. Now aiming with a mouse, hitting those weak points is ridiculously easy. I'm also annihilating these bosses in record time. Perhaps this draws a line between a new feature being convenient or making the game too easy. But it's only good as one's ability to aim. After all, a PC game in which its combat is primarily focused on aiming can't exclude keyboard and mouse controls. However, I'll admit the keyboard controls certainly take some getting used to, at least its default scheme. I kept accidentally turning my character around when I mean to aim, and sometimes when I gotta go the other way, I end up standing still out of confusion. Maybe my brain is just turning to mush, but I can't help it. The A button in the original version was used for like 3 different actions. Also, have you noticed by now? The footage you see before you is at a buttery smooth 60 FPS. Good on the folks at Engine Software, they pulled through. Although reload animation for most characters remain at 30. Something about the game messing up if they change that? I don't know, but this can be the case for certain games such as Phantom Dust and its HD port. All the gameplay and all the in-game cutscenes are now presented in true native 16:9 widescreen. As for the traditionally animated scenes, such as those in the Cloudman and Alter Ego chapters, they simply stretched the vertical resolution a bit since it was originally set somewhere awkward between 4:3 and 16:9, while sandwiched between red bars. I have to say, watching these animated scenes in full screen is a bit rough. It's possible to clean these up frame by frame as we've seen with recent Blu-ray releases of cartoon shows that were not originally presented in HD, but it is a long and costly process, and likely not possible to fit in their budget. This was clearly a very limited port financially. I also can't help but feel the stretching of the scenes are kind of apparent, but it is much better than what they showed in the early preview. Here we have a comparison between the original GameCube version as well as the new Steam edition. It's really great seeing how well Engine Software managed to transfer over everything. To discuss the visuals a bit more, there are a few blemishes here and there, some are even due to the new resolution, but I feel like only people that played it obsessively as I did back in the day are going to notice. In fact, I just showed off most of the ones I caught while playing. Notice anything off? No? Exactly. Okay, this one is obvious. Regardless, I'll submit some images to NISA and see if they're interested in fixing these visual issues, but even if they don't, it's a microscopic problem. Something I don't think is microscopic though, the tutorial and ability descriptions do not change, so if you're using a keyboard and mouse for the controls, even with no controller connected to your PC, it still shows Xbox 360 button inputs and not keys. Come on, the only other time I've seen this was in the original PC port of Dark Souls. A noticeable change for me was the font when Remnant Psyches talk to you. Although odd that they didn't use the font from the original game, it literally doesn't change anything about the experience, so it isn't offensive at all. Could be worse, like Comic Sans. Right, hijinks? The nice thing about cel-shaded graphics is even when you crank up the output resolution, they're still going to look silky smooth. These 2005 character models look beautiful in 1080p. However, none of the textures have been upscaled or changed, so seeing this game in HD really shows how rough and pixely a lot of them are. Obviously, the sources of these textures are nowhere to be found, which is a big shame, and they likely didn't want to risk impeding on the game's visual style by replacing any of the original art or textures. Take note, hijinks. Oh, whatever, that company is probably dead now. Sound output seems to be improved as well. Some voices in the original game were extremely rough, but have come out slightly better now.
To do everything in its power to eradicate all the weeds of evil and disorder. The International Society, under the motto of protecting the world from international terrorism.
This scene is still incomprehensible, oddly enough. Maybe they thought it was an artistic choice by Suda? Hell, I don't know, maybe that is the case. As for everything else, it's fine. Playing the game from beginning to end was fine, with no crashes, as I beat the entire game in a single sitting. No glitches of any sort to speak of, greatly reduced loading times, a new character swapping mechanic enhanced the experience without making it feel that different from how the game originally was. However, one little enhancement I would have liked, and this is sort of a light spoiler I suppose, but nothing major. There's points in the game where you have to input numeric codes or answers to a quiz in order to progress. I would have loved being able to punch in these answers and codes using my keyboard to finish them off really quickly, because this is a slog. Perhaps with how they designed this port, it wasn't possible. So, for people that loved Killer 7 back in the day on Gamecube or, I guess, PS2, and want to experience it again in a way that's both legal and supports Suda, check it out. Certainly beats buying used discs with no case for $30. Not only that, but the man himself claims that if this port goes over well, he'd consider expanding on the world of Killer 7 in a meaningful way.
Hopefully the sales are good and people like it, and then we can, think about something else within this world and explore that.
で、この時一緒に三上さんと
Obviously Mr. Mikami and then Mr. Kobayashi, the producer of the game, who still actually works at Capcom. If, things go well, it'd be really cool to work with him again and maybe create like the complete version of the game or something like that.
With this and the Let It Die crossover content, I suppose he's playing nice with Capcom these days. But there's a much more important question to ask. How will new players see this game? Can people who have never experienced Killer 7 get into it 12 years later? This is always something worth asking for particular games. Take, for example, GoldenEye, a first-person shooter that revolutionized its genre and met with universal praise in 1997. Many people, including myself, adored this game and would play it for hours on end back in the day. But playing it now with its original control scheme, it's undeniable how bad it feels, especially when the same team would go on to make spiritual successors that feel much better to play due to new hardware or controllers. Stack on the many first-person shooters made afterward that would surpass the kind of playability GoldenEye had. This is the privilege Killer 7 has by being so unique. There's nothing to compare it to, before or after. I'm not going to lie and say the controls are perfect, although I will state that it plays exactly as intended from beginning to end with no unforeseen bullshit. But here's the point I'm trying to make. Do you know what's the magic behind this wholly original design? It didn't age. Not one bit. It didn't age these past 12 years, and it won't for another 1200. Probably. I've discussed before that Suda designed the controls in such a way that it's unlike any other game out there, but also easy to understand for people that don't really play video games. It was criticized back in its original launch, but I feel that's because people grew to standards for action games, first person or otherwise. Additionally, I always thought this helped the game stand out even more so, like he wanted it to. And at the end of the day, it'll make sense to the player once accustomed to it. As for the game's story and presentation, it shouldn't be a surprise that this galactic tale of politics and spirituality is still something only this game has ever provided. Suda ensured that experiencing Killer 7 would be like nothing else out there, so much so that he avoided playing any other games or watching any movies when he was coming up with the idea and writing out the story.
There was actually no particular film that I referenced making when I made this game. Actually, it went so far as I wanted to focus so much on this game that I did a complete media blackout for myself. I didn't watch any movies, I didn't play any other games.
If you have never played Killer 7 and are still watching, you likely guessed the narrative is very bizarre and probably confusing. This tale of assassins is certainly all over the place and considerably unfinished. Suda claims that a ton of story-based content was removed in the final product, but it's also worth keeping in mind that it was all under his own and Shinji Mikami's discretion, so don't think important components were thrown away all willy-nilly by higher-ups.
About 2/3 of the story content was actually cut.
Whoa.
So it was actually pretty voluminous in terms of what was originally there.
なのでカットシーンがだいたい
Now, if you were to put all the cutscenes together, it's about an hour's worth of content, right? Originally it would have been about 3. 3 hours worth of content.
With that fact aside, I think the game still manages to weave an interesting tale, and you don't necessarily have to catch every bit of its deep symbolism in order to get the gist of it and take in the impact this adventure delivers. But trying to decipher that symbolism is really fun. I think Killer 7 can still offer an incredibly unique and intriguing experience today, and if you're not some stuck-up asshole who automatically hates cel-shaded graphics, please consider buying this port. I was extremely surprised that this turned out as well as it did, and can say with full confidence that Killer 7 Steam Edition is your chance as a PC player to experience this 5th gen gem that was criminally faded into obscurity back in 2005. Thanks for watching. Hey, you're still here? Well, if you aren't aware, I began a retrospective series on Suda51's mainline action titles a while ago, starting with Killer7. In that series, I go into great detail on what makes his game so vastly different from anything else out there, and how beyond all their imperfections in design, they still manage to give a completely unique and original experience. I've also covered both No More Heroes titles and Shadows of the Dam so far, and we'll be releasing more parts of it soon. Hope you stick around to see.